So this isn't going to be a very formal argument. It's just more of a discussion about the arguments I've been presented for why God exists and the reasons why those arguments have not clung to me. And I'd just like to say that if you are a Christian, I do respect your opinion. I do recognize that I could be incredibly wrong, and I am open-minded to the fact that if I were presented an argument that truly stuck with me and that I couldn't refute, that I would change my mind. I'm very open to the idea of Christianity, and at some points, sometimes, I do sometimes wish that there was a God, in the way that some describe him as an all-powerful, all-loving sort of God. And please feel free to leave your arguments in the comments if I missed them in this video, or if there are points that I didn't consider. Just try to keep things respectful. So let's start with the best arguments I've heard. So perhaps one of the best ones, or the best category of them, are just anecdotal arguments. People discussing experiences that they've had with God and how that turned them into a Christian or reinforced their Christianity. Because to be honest, these experiences are not necessarily, perhaps not possible for me to refute because I wasn't there. I wasn't in their shoes, so I didn't see what happened. Like, for instance, my wife, Abby, has a story of she was suicidal in like 7th grade, and she was about to commit suicide. She's fucking 13 years old in 7th grade. She's about to kill herself. And for some reason, and during this point, she was praying to God. And she wasn't really necessarily a Christian at the time. As a matter of fact, what she was saying to God was very, I guess, disparaging to his name. She was saying, God, if you are real, I do not like what you're doing. I'm upset with you. That's essentially what she was saying, from what I can remember her telling me. And it might have been even more intense than that. And she was about to do it, and then all of a sudden, she gets very sleepy, and she falls asleep. Next thing she knows, she just wakes up, and she feels better, and does not feel the suicidal feeling anymore. How could I possibly refute that story? And she also just felt this deep love when she woke up, from what I remember. And she couldn't explain it any other way than God made her fall asleep. And how could I possibly refute that argument? All I can say was that I wasn't in her shoes, so I don't necessarily know what was going on there. My best argument for, I guess, my case of I don't believe God exists would be that it was some kind of cluster of connections in her brain, maybe partially the placebo effect still lashing onto her. Perhaps deep in her subconscious, she did believe God was real. And because she did deeply, to some extent, believe that he was real, or had some kind of hope that he was real, she had a placebo effect experience that led her to sleep. And that's essentially what happened. This is speculation. I don't know what was going on. I don't know the full extent of neurobiology. I don't know how the human brain works. It's the most complex organ in the body. I can't say. All I can really say with any kind of anecdotal argument, and there's all kinds of them, is that I can't consider that evidence, because human beings are imperfect. Human beings hallucinate. Human beings' eyewitness accounts are not necessarily reliable a lot of the time. I believe there have been studies done that sort of dive deeper into the reliability of eyewitness accounts and have discovered that people can often make stories up. So I just cannot consider an anecdotal argument a solid one. I just can't. Especially when you're taking into account the idea of confirmation bias, the idea that people are willing to seek out arguments that reaffirm their existing beliefs. It's a known bias in the human brain. And that's not me saying that if you had an anecdotal experience with God, that you are immediately considered in my head to be an irrational person who thinks based off of bias. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we all have different perspectives on life, and our perspectives shift how we view things that happen to us. A very similar argument to the anecdotal ones is that Christians often say, like, can't you feel God? Can't you feel he's all around us? And to me, I mean, I would have to say no. And you might retort that it's because I haven't accepted God or what have you. And I might get to that in a later point. But I feel joy. I feel warmth. I feel happiness. I feel a deep sense of good in the world. I don't think that comes from God. From my perspective, it does not come from God. It comes from the idea that a lot of human beings are empathetic and joyful and pleasurable to be around, and human biology has kind of hardwired us to love nature and love the world, love the sun, because those are mechanisms that helped us survive in the past. And I do believe in evolution. So it would make a lot of sense for humans to evolve natural loving for a love for the natural world. But at the end of the day, if you've had an anecdotal experience that has ratified your Christian belief or has converted you into a Christian, I'm not going to sit here and say that that's not a valuable experience. You and only you truly know what has happened to you. And I guess all I'm suggesting is to think about how your brain works and wonder to yourself whether that experience that you had was truly real and if it probably was real, maybe try to think about it from an outside perspective and see if you can really verify that it was God. And I don't know if my purpose at this video isn't necessarily to convert you into a non-religious person, although I do believe that there are some benefits to being a non-religious person, contrary to popular belief. For example, that's another argument that is given by Christians, is that what do you lose by being a Christian, by being a believer? And I will say this one thing. Most Christians, from what I understand, believe that God will save them. Believe that if there's a bad thing that's about to happen, that God will help them, that God will give them a certain strength. And I do think that belief could be flawed, especially in a hypothetical scenario, but also in real world scenarios. Like I was talking to a Christian, I won't say their name, but I was speaking to them about AI, about the risk of the existential risk of artificial intelligence, which is a subject that I'm deeply involved in the study of and the mitigation of. And they were kind of catastrophizing. They were sharing the same beliefs that I have, and they were kind of acting in a pessimistic way, which is very respectable to do. I often have the same pessimistic beliefs about artificial intelligence, but I was asking them, I would ask them, okay, so you believe these bad things that artificial intelligence is going to bring, which I believe the same. So what is the sense in ruminating about it if you won't do something about it? Go ahead, act in the real world and see if you can change something, which is what I am doing. And they said, well, I can pray. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray. And in my head, I guess I was just kind of frustrated with that, because what if God does not exist? Then you're staking your outcome on his existence. Whereas if you did not believe in God, maybe you would take some action in the real world to change things yourself. And I brought this up to Abby, my wife, who told me that this is actually not necessarily what a Christian should be saying from her perspective, that Christians shouldn't stake so much on God. They shouldn't put that much, they shouldn't give that much responsibility to him, because at the end of the day, God doesn't necessarily want to step in. He wants you to have free will and make your own decisions. So that's another very fair argument to consider. And that kind of way of thinking about it can probably be applied to other risks in the world, like, say, nuclear war. If your belief in God is going to make you pray that you never get hit by a nuclear weapon, and that makes you feel comfortable, then you might not ever think about your other options to avoid being killed by a nuclear weapon, like moving to a lower risk area of the world, building a nuclear bunker, taking real world action. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to agree with me. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. And I would love to hear opposing arguments. I would love to interface with them. I just hope that you'd be as respectful to me as I'm at least trying to be to you. I hope I'm being respectful. And also just the sheer number of people who have religious experiences of the divine. Millions, if not hundreds of millions of people claim to have interacted with God, to have seen God, to have seen Jesus, interacted with Jesus, Muhammad, any kind of religious figures. There's so much anecdotal evidence. How could you write it all off? You know, it's hard to do that. And the only thing I can dismiss it as is just, it's possible that the human brain likes the idea of something existing that's bigger than us. And so it likes conclusions that are from the perspective of such a thing. Regardless of any of that. And you see that I'm having trouble refuting this, because it is hard. It's hard to do that. I can't write it off as evidence. I can't call it evidence. I can't call it enough reason to believe, because there's other powers at play. And you could say, how could so many millions, hundreds of millions of people have experiences with this entity? How could you write that off? How could you dismiss that? It has to be extremely unlikely that every single one of those people is wrong. And to that, I guess I would say, yeah, it sounds ridiculous. Maybe it sounds ridiculous. Maybe it sounds very silly and very unlikely. What also sounds very unlikely, or something that would be incredibly rare, just as rare of a thing, is this all-powerful, all-knowing God existing. You know, we're dealing with two completely unlikely scenarios here. You know what I mean? But I will most definitely concede that if anything sways me,
oh, you better not fucking
jump ahead of me. If anything sways me in favor of belief, it would probably be that. Next up is the fine-tuning argument. The idea that everything in this universe and on this planet is so unbelievably perfect that there has to be a creator. It wouldn't make sense. Like, it's also the same argument is called the Swiss watch argument. If you stumbled upon a beautifully crafted Swiss watch on the beach and you picked it up, you wouldn't say to yourself, oh wow, well this is incredible how all these molecules came together in such a serendipitous way and created this watch. No, you would say, oh, somebody made that watch. And this is, again, one of the strongest arguments for the existence of a God. Now, this particular argument doesn't necessarily prove that the Christian God is the God that exists, or any specific religion's God. It's mostly an argument for the existence of God himself, just a God or gods, a creator. So there's one particular refutation that leads me to not be convinced by this argument. Now, and before we proceed, I'd like to say that I don't believe that God doesn't exist. It's not that I believe he is not real. It's that I can't conclude whether there is a God or there isn't. I don't believe there is enough information, at least that I have seen, to verify this claim. I'm more of an agnostic. I'm not an atheist. I am agnostic. So the main refutation that I have for the fine-tuning argument would be that, yes, this universe is so incredibly perfect, and this world is so incredibly perfect. How could it possibly be happening? How could it possibly happen by accident? Now, the thing is, and I don't disagree with that, what I will say is that it's kind of kicking the can down the road. And what I mean by that is, you could also say the exact same thing about God himself. This God is so all-powerful and so all-loving and so perfect that he's smart enough to create an entire universe around us. How could something like that come about by accident? Somebody created that God. Well, who created that God? You know? That's why I feel that argument is kind of kicking the can down the road. And then you'd have to have a God that created that God, and a God that created the God that created that God. We'd have just keep going down the line. There has to be an origin somewhere. And you might refute to that, well, God always was and always will be. But that doesn't really change my argument in my eyes. Like, okay, God always was and always will be. That's still incredibly perfect, almost too perfect. Just like a Swiss watch, how could that just appear out of nowhere? And you could also use that same argument to the universe. Oh, the universe always was and always will be. The universe is this ethereal thing. Applying the same argument to a completely different perspective. So I can't say that the fine-tuning argument sways me one way or another. And just to double down on some things I've already said about anecdotal evidence, it is hard to refute because of the massive number of anecdotal accounts. It's also hard to conclude them as being true because of the clear fact that not only do so many people believe in a God, but so many people want to believe in a God. So it would also make sense for those eyewitness accounts to have been rationalized to be God when they could have been a dreamlike hallucination or just a misinterpreted thing that happened, or really any kind of occurrence.
And this is not to say that they are wrong. It's to say that I cannot conclude that it is God one way or the other. Next, we've got something that might be something I consider even stronger than the fine-tuning argument, which is physical artifacts. Most notably would probably be the Shroud of Turin. So the Shroud of Turin, you probably have heard of it. It's perhaps the most popular piece, the most popular religious artifact that exists. And it is essentially I believe, a linen cloth with an imprint of a crucified man on it. And there is no known way of producing textiles or fabrication that could have possibly existed in a medieval era or a pre-medieval era that might render this shroud, this cloth, as pure something that was designed. And it has been tested for actual blood, and I believe it has been verified that there is actual blood of type AB on said cloth. So this is rather puzzling. This is kind of perhaps the most promising piece of evidence that exists for at least Jesus Christ. So when I was originally learning about, bro, what the fuck are you honking at? Why are you honking? When I was originally learning about this piece of cloth, I thought that it was blood that made the resemblance of a man on the cloth. No, it's not. It's this very incredibly thin layer on the cloth. I believe it has like this yellowish tint or something. And it is inexplicable by any medieval practice or any modern practice how the hell this imprint was made. It has not been replicated by any technology. There is no known medieval technology that would have been able to do this. It's this imprint is so thin that it doesn't even pass through one layer of thread, I believe, from what I understand. It's a complete marvel, and nobody understands it. And so religious people claim that clearly this is a sign of resurrection, and skeptics claim that it could have been some kind of very weird byproduct of the environment that the cloth was stored in, and that paired with the decomposition of the body, or it could have been some weird form of vapor. And on top of this, the imprint and the bloodstains, etc., point to verifiable Roman crucifixion practices, and the way that the blood is on the cloth suggests that it is real blood, the way that it was flowing and the gravity pooling and such. Oh shit, I'm on the wrong exit. Fuck. And so, if you're a religious person, you would certainly say that this points to resurrection. Now, and you would say that any other explanation just doesn't make any sense and would be too unlikely of an explanation to be the case. And what I would say is that yes, any form of decomposition or vapor leaving that imprint, or some kind of medieval practice that hasn't been shown in any other artifact, it's just completely lost beside this one artifact. It does all sound very unlikely, incredibly unlikely. so does a man rising from the dead. That sounds very unlikely as well. You know where you understand where I'm coming from this? On top of that, there has been, I believe, carbon dating, correct me if I'm wrong, done on this cloth that has dated it back to medieval times, around 1300 AD or something. Notice how I used AD and not CE. Give you some respect there. So the thing about this dating is that there could have been interactions with the cloth after it was created, after this imprint was left, that could have messed up that dating, some people say. So it's perhaps not as conclusive of evidence as some people make it out to be that this cloth is not religious. So to me, it is still a mystery. We still haven't really cracked the code on it. You can make the assumption that it is a religious thing if you want. I don't like making assumptions. And you could also say that that piece of evidence, compounded with the fact that so many people have so many anecdotal stories of the divine, of Jesus and of God, you could say that the Shroud of Turin, paired with the anecdotal stories, paired with the fine-tuning argument, can compound into a situation where how could you possibly ignore all of this and still be skeptical? And to that, I would say that, of course, there's so many arguments, because there's so many people on this planet who are debating the existence of God. There's so many people who don't want God to exist. There's so many people who do want God to exist. So of course we're going to have so much discourse, and there's going to be much more artifacts and much more deliberation on the topic, given that it's such a popular one. So I just, given what we have, I can't conclude it. I can maybe give you maybe a percentage chance. Maybe there's a 50-50 chance. 50% that God exists, 50% that it doesn't. I don't know if it's 50-50. I don't know if it's 199 or 25-75. I just don't know if I can conclude anything. And I know that's kind of difficult. That's not the most exciting thing to say. It's just how I feel.
What I can say with certainty is that there are some abnormal things that are going on that are hard to explain completely with any single argument. That's what I can conclude with certainty, is that I am uncertain.
And there's other supposed pieces of evidence, like the supposed, saying that a lot, claims of people finding Noah's Ark, and then there's the Ark of the Covenant, and then there's like this limestone box that was found in like 2002. What was it called? I forget, but it was like, it had engraved on it, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. And there's claims about that, whether it's true or not. But what is certainly true, see, none of these pieces of evidence I consider nearly as strong as the Shroud of Turin, because just the absolute physical unknown nature of the Shroud of Turin suggests religious and divine involvement. None of the, it doesn't seem like any of the other ones do. Like historians, it seems that historians know, and it has been sort of proven, that Jesus was a person who existed. Jesus was a human being, and was a person who was believed to be a miracle worker. The question is not whether Jesus existed. It's whether Jesus was a religious figure, whether he actually was connected to God. And whether these miracles that he was said to perform, whether he actually performed them, and whether they actually were religious miracles. And so proof that Jesus exists, that makes sense to me. Now, if we are to accept that Jesus was a miracle worker who did rise from the dead and who is the Son of God, then that brings us to wonder about the Bible, because the Bible, as far as I understand, is written by the disciples of Jesus. These disciples, while holy, considered holy, are humans, and humans are imperfect, which leads me to think that if the Bible is written by the disciples who are writing what they saw and writing what Jesus told them and such, how accurate is this text? And that leads us down a whole other rabbit hole. And if you ask me, it might be more likely, a lot more likely, that a large amount of the things written in the Bible are perhaps fabricated by the people who wrote the Bible. Now, I say this because there would maybe either be incentive to do so, and just because human beings are not the most rational. I mean, I guess they are the most rational by default, but we still have sort of monkey brains, including me. So it's hard to trust basically what is an entire book filled of eyewitness accounts, stories, anecdotes. And this is assuming the hypothetical that Jesus is the Son of God and that God does exist. Now, I have not read the Bible. I have only heard small excerpts of it, and I've heard what other people say about it. So I'm not going to act like I'm some aficionado. I am a dilettante. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But based off, I guess, what I've heard kind of thing, let's pull an example. The idea that if you do not believe in God, you are automatically going to hell. I've heard some Christians say they believe in this and others say they don't. And it's kind of the origin of Pascal's wager, which is essentially the idea that if you believe in God, then you're not really losing anything. If you're wrong, you're not losing anything. You just end up living an admirable life where you pursue valuable religious beliefs and try to be a good person. But if you don't believe in God and he is real, if you're wrong there, then you're screwed. You're fucked. You're going to hell. You're being tortured for eternity. And that just, for one thing, that argument as a whole, I have possibly a few refutations to that. One of them being this God, who is claimed in the Bible and by followers of Christianity to be all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good. If he is all-loving and all-powerful, and he would send you to hell just because you don't believe in him. And what Abby, my wife, has told me is that, well, why would he force you to be with him if you don't want to be with him? I mean, it's not that I don't want to be with him.
It's more so that I'm just not completely convinced. I've seen reasonable arguments for that side. I've also seen incredibly reasonable arguments for the other side. And in my opinion, I wouldn't say, and I wouldn't consider it an opinion. I would consider it a thought. I don't really think that it's under my control what I believe. It's under my control what I do and what I say. But I think I've had it put to me before as like this chair right here. It is not under my control whether I believe that this chair is underneath me. If you walked up to me and said, okay, I'll give you $50. I'll give you $50 if you stop believing in that chair. I wouldn't be able to get that $50 if you were an accurate auditor of me and my thoughts. Because I can think to myself, I can think in my head, in my inner monologue, okay, the chair is not real. The chair is not real. The chair is not real. And I can act as if the chair isn't real. I can avoid trying to sit down in the chair and say, oh, I'm going to fall if I sit down in the chair. But in my mind, I'm still going to believe that the chair is there. If you put a gun to my head and said, all right, if you get this question wrong, I'm going to shoot you. Is the chair real? I'm going to say yes, or at least I believe that the chair is impacting my reality or whatever. Because is the chair real? What is real? But that's a whole other discussion. And the idea that someone could go to hell for not believing in a God, that seems completely ridiculous. Like, not only on the front that it's completely out of my control, but also on the front that how could an all-powerful, all-loving God send someone to eternal torture just because they're a little skeptical? Just because they're not completely there, all the way there yet. You know what I'm saying? I don't get that. That sounds to me, what's more likely to me is that someone who had a vested interest in converting another person to Christianity just fucking made up. And either put in the Bible or interpreted it that way from the original Bible. Like, that seems way more likely. Because, I mean, I can even imagine, have you heard about, in the 1400s or so, the Catholic Church specifically was making a killing selling something called indulgences, which is just a piece of paper written by the Pope that was people would buy, and it would get them out of purgatory. And they sold these indulgences to fund some kind of cathedral or something. Like, it sounds like, and that was obviously a lie. And from what I understand, the Pope has no religious power to do that. Though I guess I could be wrong based on the historical texts. It sounds like that kind of lie made up by a human. That doesn't sound like the word of a God. And if it truly is the word of a God, if this kind of God is one that is willing to send me to hell for being a skeptic, for being a little bit uncertain, then is he the type of God that I really want to worship? Would I want to worship that kind of God? That sounds like the fucking devil. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm being a little emotional here. My goal was not to be incredibly emotional or get riled up at all. And anyway, another thing is the idea of blasphemy, the unforgivable sin of blasphemy, which, correct me if I'm wrong, blasphemy is essentially making fun of God, telling people that God isn't real, using the Lord's name in vain. Is that blasphemy? Just like saying horrible things about God. And in my mind, an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving God, he would send you to eternal damnation, eternal torture, the worst nightmare you could possibly imagine, for talking a little shit, for talking some shit. You understand, the United States government is not that cruel. The worst tyrants of eternity
were not that cruel. Now, that might have been, a guy like Genghis Khan. Maybe he just they're only not that cruel because they don't have the power to send you to eternal damnation. There's that argument, of course. But for the love of God, no pun intended. I mean, that just sounds ludicrous to me. And of course, I would love, I could be missing something. I have not read the Bible. This could be this could be completely not germane to the argument at all. And this is I'm just shitting out of my mouth. I'm shitting out of my mouth. I think I'm going to end the video there. I might do a part 2 at some point because I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface of the debate. We could go talk for hours upon hours. So leave some comments about, just be respectful and leave some comments about some things that I missed or some topics that I should discuss or really anything that you might want to see in part 2 and that you might want to address. This has been fun. I enjoy talking about this. Also, I forgot to mention that my name is Luke and you're watching Castles in the Air. I always forget to say that. Really, goodbye.